Okay, folks, we're all set to get ourselves underway here now in lesson number 4 in our Psalms primer. Take your Bible and turn with me, if you would, to Psalm 50. Hopefully you have had the opportunity to do what I asked you to do at the end of the last lesson. We just introduced the second book of the Psalms, dealing with the second mandate of the Davidic covenant, the deliverer and his deliverance. You're familiar with the core issue in each book of the Psalms. That's what we're taking our opportunity to look at, and to see that each one of the books of the Psalms does deal with each one of these 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant in their proper order. And the core Psalms clearly illustrate that and set that forth. I asked you, like I said last time, to in preparation for this lesson, to hopefully at least be able to read through the core Psalms to the second book of the Psalms. Second book of the Psalms is Psalm 42 through 72. The core Psalms is a group of Psalms from Psalm 50 to Psalm 60. And hopefully you've had, like I said, the opportunity to do that. Not that we're going to cover all those Psalms by name, but I just wanted you familiar once again with the reality of the fact that in these core Psalms to the second book of the Psalms, the constant theme, the constant prayer, as David said that this book of the Psalms was full of, the second book was full of, was for the implementation of the deliverance that the deliverer, the mighty God, his title as a deliverer in connection with the second mandate of the Davidic covenant, would provide for Israel, especially for the believing remnant out there in the day of the Lord. David, once again, as we indicated last time, and quickly at least saw last time at the end of the lesson, David functioned as a type of what the remnant would be going through in the day of the Lord. That's why his experiences and everything are recorded in detail back there in the book of and the 1 Samuel and the 2 Samuel. And that's why so many Psalms have as their superscription the particular circumstances David was in, predicament-wise, persecution-wise, tribulation-wise, especially in the second book of the Psalm, that he experienced. Because the remnant will find themselves in some will find themselves in caves. Some will be persecuted by Israel's apostate religious rulers like David was by Saul. Some will be out there amongst the Gentiles and be persecuted by, like David was by the Philistines and the Edomites and so forth there. And as David prayed for the deliverer to put his deliverance into effect, and as God set that forth before and made him a type once again, so his legitimate experience and deliverance could be appreciated and set forth legitimately in these Psalms, so will the remnant experience them in their fullness out there in the day of the Lord. Let me take the sign down here. When as the second mandate of the Davidic covenant begins to be transpired, the Lord functions as their deliverer. By the way, he functions as their deliverer and their avenger during the day of the Lord. There's a fine line of distinction between those two concepts, and the effects of those two concepts are going on at the same time during the day of the Lord. But in particular, the results that are achieved by them make it so that they need to be recognized as two distinct things. Although oftentimes the same event and judgment is performed by the Lord, and it accomplishes both deliverance for the remnant and the avengement of God's cause with Israel upon his enemies. And you'll see that. You'll see similarity of issues in the second book of the Psalms and the third book of the Psalms. The second one dealing with the deliverer and his deliverance, the third one dealing with the avenger and his avengement. You'll quite often see similarity of issues, similarity of appeals, similarity of statements being made in the Psalms. And the reason why, once again, is because through the same experiences and the same physical deliverances that the remnant has, not only are they getting the physical deliverance, but God's also avenging his cause with Israel upon his enemies. And you need to see that. But they are two separate issues. They're presented as two separate needs in the Davidic covenant, and they need to be treated separately, and they got separate books in the Psalms setting them forth. Well, the core Psalms here, though, once again, for the second book of the Psalms, is Psalm 50 through Psalm 60. If you had the chance to read it through, you're very familiar with the repetition of the concept of deliverance. And we're going to start by looking at the 50th Psalm here. I indicated to you last time that this Psalm starts off with the very name that the Lord is going to be called. Adonai Jehovah, the Messiah, is going to be called in connection with functioning as the deliverer and providing the deliverance. The very name, the mighty God, that is given over there and cited over there in Isaiah chapter 9, that the child born, the son given, will be called by as he fulfills all the commands of the Davidic covenant. He's given 5 names: Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, all matching up once again with the 5 mandates. As the Redeemer, he'll be called Wonderful. As the Deliverer, he'll be called the Mighty God. As the Avenger, he'll be called the Counselor. As the King, he'll be called the Prince of Peace. As the Blessed, he'll be called the Everlasting Father. And he begets blessing once again that never stops for his men. That's why he's called the Everlasting Father. And you see that in the context and everything. But he's called the Mighty God in connection with being the Deliverer. And that's the very way in which this 50th Psalm that begins the core Psalms for the second book of the Psalms starts out. And it makes an appeal to him to function as such, to function as the mighty God and come and deliver them. Now this 50th Psalm is not only fascinating for that issue and important to recognize for that issue, being the first of the core Psalms in the second book of the Psalms, but this 50th Psalm has a lot of information in it that lets you understand and appreciate how God looks at his nation and things going on in the gospel accounts and things that will be transpiring out there in the day of the Lord as he functions as a deliverer and so forth there. I'd like to at least point some of those things out. I'm trying to, at the same time we go through the Psalms and look at the core Psalms and get an appreciation for the mandates of the Davidic covenant, I'm trying to give you at least some insight and perception as to the use of these Psalms, especially by the remnant, as those mandates are experientially coming to pass, and they're appreciating them. And as I've said already, we're going to end this study with a look at a few Psalms and focus exactly on that. But I'm trying to sprinkle some of that through as we proceed on here. We saw that a little bit last time, dealing with the 22nd Psalm as the core Psalm for the first book of the Psalms. And here I'd like to have you see some things also as we look at these core Psalms for the second book of the Psalms, dealing with the deliverer and his deliverance. But let's notice as it starts off, the mighty God once again, his very title as the deliverer. Even the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Jehovah, citing that as his name in connection with his Jehovahness, hath spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. It says, hath spoken. Oh, God's spoken a number. What's that talking about? Just the fact that he speak the world into existence? Well, he certainly did that and everything. But he's spoken as the mighty God. He set forth the issue of the fact that I'll function as your deliverer and deliver you. And he has set forth already to Israel the way in which that's going to come to pass. And he set it forth especially here to David, and it's described here. I mean to Asaph here, and it's described here. What he has spoken, what he said he was going to do and everything, and the experience that would be possessed by the remnant when he delivers, that's all set before here. Or the principle of it, I should say, is set before them here in this 50th Psalm. Out of Zion, verse 2, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Our God shall come, and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be very tempestuous round about him. He's going to come as the mighty God. He's going to come. He's going to come as a conquering hero, and he's going to come and vanquish some enemies, and he's going to come and provide some deliverance for his people. And that's what's the issue there. He's going to come. That's not referring to this coming here. As far as the historical implementation of the mandates of the Davidic covenant is concerned, the first book of the Psalms is over. He's functioned as the Redeemer. That's done. And he's gone back to heaven, and he's sitting at the Father's right hand there once again, waiting for his enemies to be made his footstool. And when the time comes for his enemies to be made his footstool, then he stands once again, and he comes, and he prepares to come as their mighty God. And he prepares to provide for their deliverance and the avengement of his cause with Israel. And the acme, I guess we could say, of that deliverance, along with that avengement, but the focus here is upon the deliverance, is when he actually comes at the end of his day of wrath, the great and terrible day of the Lord, and comes as described there in verse 3, and produces the deliverance. Now, the details of that deliverance and everything are what are described in the following Psalms that function as the core Psalms here, especially as the core Psalms. But the issue that he's going to function as the mighty God and come and deliver is what's being fundamentally set forth here now in this 50th Psalm. And he'll come and not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him. It shall be very tempestuous round about him. He shall call to the heavens from above and to the earth, that he may judge his people. Gather my saints together unto me. That's his remnant. That those that have made a covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens shall declare his righteousness, for God is judge himself. Selah. Now you see, you pause there once again, especially. Make sure you got the doctrine set down. You understand what's going before you go on to the next issue. But that's what's set forth in those first 6 verses is the fundamental accomplishment of him functioning as the Redeemer and functioning as the Deliverer and providing the deliverance. He's going to come as their mighty God and fight for them and vanquish their enemies and deliver them, personally and collectively, as the remnant especially. Then once that is stated, verse 7 goes on here now, and there's an appeal that's made. The Lord makes an appeal once again through Asaph to his people in preparation for that. It's an appeal once again that particularly was heard by the nation during the extension of mercy and forbearance there, and will be heard from them again once the dispensation of grace ends, the program resumes for a short time before the day of the Lord actually begins. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, and I will testify against thee. I am God, even thy God. Now, you get interesting thing there, verse 7. Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against thee. Well, Israel is his people, yeah. But he's actually got a portion of his people, as he says there in verse 5, that are his saints, that have made a covenant with him by sacrifice. That's his remnant. They're his people. They're his generation, like we saw last time. The seed that's accounted to the Lord for his generation. The rest is his nation, all right, but he's going to call them wicked down in verse 16. He's going to testify against them. He's going to speak to his remnant in comforting words. He's going to testify against his nation with woes. And following functioning as their Redeemer and preparation functioning as their Deliverer, that's what he does. And from verse 7 and down through verse 15, he sets forth what the believing remnant in Israel needs to understand and appreciate. And this is where they need to disassociate themselves once again, as we were pointing out last time, from apostate Israel. If they're going to experience the physical deliverance that he's promised and everything, they've got to get themselves out of contact with apostate Israel, because he's going to judge apostate Israel. And the first mechanical means by which they get physically delivered is to themselves physically separate themselves from apostate Israel. That's why he says to them here, verse 8, I will not reprove thee for thy sacrifices or thy burnt offerings to have been continually before me. I will take no bullock out of thy house, nor he-goats out of thy folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, every cattle upon... See, the one sacrifice God was looking for, and then everything's wrapped up and it's already taken place. So he doesn't expect them to continue on the temple offering sacrifices. Apostate Israel is going to do that. He comes on and says, I'm not going to reprove you for that, because he's telling them to get out of there. And they don't need any of that, because they've got the one sacrifice that takes away sin and everything. The book of Hebrews takes that concept there and teaches it to the remnant. So they don't go into that temple any longer, and they recognize absolutely no need for that. And they recognize what's still going on there are the offering of bulls and goats and sacrifices that can't take away sins. And that actually is doing despite to the Spirit of grace, and is trotting underfoot the Son of God, and so forth. And what they're supposed to do, verse 14, offer unto God thanksgiving and pay thy vows unto the Most High. That's what Hebrews 12 and 13 ends up telling them to do. Those are the sacrifices God's well pleased with, not the animal sacrifices. And then verse 15, the last verse on which God speaks to the remnant, he comes along and promises to give them the deliverance he just said in the first 6 verses he would do. Verse 15, and call upon me in the day of trouble, time of Jacob's trouble out there, that's where they're going to be once again. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. See, I'm going to come as the mighty God. I'm going to be your deliverer, give you the deliverance. I will deliver thee in that day of trouble out there. That's not a promise to you today in the dispensation of grace when you're in some kind of trouble. That's a promise to the believing remnant in connection with responding in connection with being part of his remnant, having responded to the redemption, now separating themselves from apostate Israel, and they're going to experience a time of trouble out there for that very reason. They're going to be persecuted once again by apostate Israel, cast out of the synagogue, as the Lord told them in John chapter 15 and 16. Times come when someone's going to put you to death, persecute you, and they're going to put you to death, think they do God's service. It's a time of Jacob's trouble for two reasons. Not just Gentile oppression, but oppression for the believing remnant, the seed called out of Jacob by the apostate religious system. And that's their day of trouble out there. He says, I'll deliver you. I'll fulfill the second mandate of the Davidic covenant, and I'll deliver you. Call upon. That's why he tells them there, when he teaches them in the Sermon on the Mount, ask, and you shall receive. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. He's talking to the remnant. The apostate element can ask, seek, and knock all day long. He says, I won't hear them. Anyway, unto the wicked, that's the apostate element once again, as he testifies against them from verse 7. But unto the wicked, God saith, what hast thou to do to declare my statutes? This is the wicked in Israel. They got the law. What hast thou to do to declare my statutes, or thou shouldest take my covenant in thy mouth, seeing thou hatest instruction, and castest my words behind thee? When thou sawest a thief, then thou consentest with him, and hast been partaker with adulterers. That's why the Lord deals with those two issues in the Sermon on the Mount. Thou givest thy mouth to evil, and thy tongue frameth deceit. Thou sittest and speakest against thy brother, thou slayest thine own mother's son. That's why he made a big issue of the issue on your father and mother and so forth there. These things hast thou done. I kept silence. That's what he was during that third installment, fifth course of punishment. 400 years of silence, and that apostate element and the vain religious system developed and got itself entrenched in Israel, and they thought they were holy and righteous because they were doing those things and God didn't judge. But they didn't understand what was going on in the program. The Lord says, these things thou hast done, I kept silence. Thou thoughtest that I was altogether such as one as thyself. But I will reprove thee. That's what he does in his earthly ministry when he comes. And he does that through the Sermon on the Mount in particular. I will reprove thee and set them in order before thine eyes. Now consider this, ye that forget God, lest I tear you in pieces, and there be none to deliver. When he functions as, in the day of his wrath, he pours out his judgment upon the apostate element, especially in the nation. The believing remnant, verse 15, in the day of trouble will get delivered. The apostate element will be torn in pieces, and there'll be none to deliver them. Whoso offereth praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. The salvation, physical salvation, deliverance of God. That's the remnant there. But before that takes place, there's an appeal to the rest of the nation to believe that gospel of the kingdom and become part of that remnant and get that deliverance instead of being one that's torn in pieces and there's none to deliver. Well, that's how the core Psalms in the second book of Psalms open up with this 50th Psalm. Now, the previous Psalms in the second book, from Psalm 42 up to Psalm 49 here, have set the stage for the need for this and everything. And they've talked about things that have manifested the need for this and all the various troubles and so forth. And now you come to the core, and the promise is there, the name, the title that he has as the deliverer, the mighty God is set forth. The time frame is he's just functioned as the Redeemer. He's going to function as the deliverer, but there's an extension of mercy and forbearance in which he gives repentance to Israel and a chance for them to become part of the remnant before he tears in pieces. And then the Psalms go on. Psalm 51 through 60, the remainder of the core Psalms in this overall second book of the Psalms. And the various deliverances from the various troubles and all that kind of business that are physically experienced by the remnant out here are described. Let's look at some of them. Psalm 51, come on down to verse 14. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, O God, thou God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of thy righteousness. There's a whole host of deliverances starting from blood guiltiness on to physical deliverance from famine, starvation, the shadow of death, and so forth. I learned the lesson in the last lesson that as delightful as it is to spend as much time as we can on these type of issues, if we're going to cover the material, we got to move here. I'm just going to take you through very quickly here these core psalms, and just note, you should have done this already just by reading it. Note how many times the concept of deliverance and physical salvation and everything comes up. Come over to Psalm 53 here. No, look at Psalm 52 there. When Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said that David has come to the house of Ahimelech, and a conspiracy took place once again to kill David. David wrote a psalm once again about that, and he knew deliverance was coming. It had been promised, just like the remnant's going to be in a similar situation out there, have betrayers and everything. Betray them. They've been promised a deliverance. What are they supposed to do? Look at the last verse in the Psalm, Psalm 9. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it. And I will wait on thy name, for it is good before thy saints. I will wait on thy name. His name's Jehovah once again. He's made a promise in connection with his name. I'll be for you whatever you need it to be. He's already declared the fact that I can function as the Redeemer because I function as I can function as the Deliverer because I function as the Redeemer. The promise is there in Psalm 50 for the Deliverer to come, and David simply says, I'm in the predicament and everything. I'm going to wait on your name. That's the attitude the remnant's going to need to have. Confident, assurant, waiting on the name coming to pass. He's promised, he'll do it. Psalm 53, look at the last verse, verse 6. You'll notice that every one of the last verses in these core Psalms, the second book of Psalms, makes that appeal for the deliverer. Oh, that the salvation of Israel were come out of Zion. When God bringeth back the captivity of his people, Jacob shall rejoice, and Israel shall be glad. Hold your place there in Psalm 53 there for a moment. Come over, if you would, to Romans chapter 11. And look with me, if you would, at verse 26. In Romans chapter 11 and verse 26, when the Apostle Paul, describing this dispensation of Gentile grace and the blindness of the nation Israel during this dispensation of grace and the fact they don't see God dealing with them and the fulfillment of his program with them, and then cites the fact that the blindness is only temporary till the fullness of Gentiles become in, and then Israel's going to have the totality of the salvation package deal they've been promised. Paul cites a verse out of Isaiah in verse 26, when he says, and so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the who? The deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant to them when I shall take away their sins. There shall come out of Zion the deliverer. What is verse 6 of Psalm 53? Oh, that the salvation of Israel will come out of Zion. He's referring once again to the physical implementation of the very thing that's later on spoken of by Isaiah, that Paul cites there in Romans chapter 11, but that was cited by Asaph in Psalm 50 in the opening verses, when God comes. And he comes to Israel, and he comes and he roars out of Zion as the deliverer. And he produces the physical deliverance by vanquishing all Israel's enemies that he's gathered around about Jerusalem and the land. And that's what the psalmist is talking about here. But when that very thing is dealt with again by Isaiah, the very title, the deliverer, is used. That very second title for the second mandate of the Davidic covenant is used. And Paul cites it accurately in Romans, because Paul recognizes that as far as the remaining mandates of the Davidic covenant are concerned to produce the entire salvation package deal for the nation Israel, the Redeemer has already functioned. Then God broke off his program with Israel and suspended it. And what remains is the deliverer, the avenger, the king, and the blesser. And the two verses Paul cites there from Isaiah take all four of those remaining mandates into account. The deliverer comes out of Zion, turns away ungodliness from Jacob. This is the covenant to them when I take away their sins. And he's able, therefore, on the basis of that, to avenge them. The covenant is the Davidic covenant in particular, and he's able to function as a king and bless them. That's their fullness in Romans chapter 11. Psalm 54. When the Zephims came and said to Saul, doth not David hide himself with us? More betrayers, but of a different sort. Last issue, verse 7, for he hath delivered me out of all trouble, and mine eye hath seen his desire upon mine enemies. The remnant's going to have the exact same experiences when they're betrayed in similar manner by some devious, apostate elements within the nation, just like David was. By the way, notice most of these are maskil psalms. Maskil. Those are doctrinally educating psalms. They're for the education of the remnant, because the remnant's going to go through the very same type things. Psalm 55. Well, the whole psalm is a graphic description once again of the troubles and the physical deliverances that I had. Come on down to verse 16. As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud. Once again, that's why these are called the prayers of David for the deliverances. And he shall hear my voice, just like the remnant's going to be taught there. And ask, you'll receive. Seek, you'll find. Knock, will be open. I'll hear your voice. He hath delivered my soul in peace, verse 18, from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. There's a physical battle. There's armies once again coming out to seek them out. And there's times when David was all by himself. There's times when he's alone, when he's together with others. There's times when a member of the remnant is going to be all by himself. There's times when he's going to be with other members of the remnant in hiding. Psalm 56. When the Philistines took him, a miktam psalm of David. Last verse, verse 13. For thou hast delivered my soul from death. Wilt not thou deliver my feet from falling, that I may walk before God in the light of the living? And that's when he had the sentence of death in him. That's all he could see was death. Well, that was the option out there. The only one he could see way out. Psalm 57. When he fled from Saul in the cave. Verse 2, I will cry unto God most high, unto God that performeth all things for me. Performing all those things in connection with the deliverances once again. He shall send from heaven and save me from the reproach of him that would swallow me up. By the way, it's in connection with this, folks. I'm just going to point this out. It's in connection with this that the guardian angels for the nation Israel come into play. The guardian angels issue, folks, is a legitimate biblical issue, but it's Israel's. You don't have any guardian angels in this dispensation of grace. You don't need them. The guardian angel concept is in connection with God's program with Israel. They're the ones that have guardian angels. It's the remnant of Israel in whose angelic hands they're entrusted. And the guardian angel concept is greatly misunderstood today, and the fervor and all the talk and everything all about is so perverted and distorted and corrupted that unfortunately even a lot of Christians, grace Christians, are affected by it. I say that because within the context of these Psalms, you come across that concept, and being sending from heaven and Satan, that involves that. By the way, the book of Hebrews explains all that to them. Psalm 50, well, for time's sake here, Psalm 59. We're going to get moving here. Look at the superscription here. Another miktam of David. When Saul sent and they watched the house to kill him. Deliver me from mine enemies, O God. Defend me from them that rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity, and save me from bloody men. That's the issue once again. The issue in the second book of the Psalms is the deliverer and his deliverances for the remnant in the day of the Lord. And that's what all the Psalms are about. These core Psalms are talking about the mechanical means by which the deliverances come to pass. in all these various situations David was in that function as types and foretaste parallels to what the remnant will find themselves in. By the way, that's explained in Hebrews also, the legitimacy of that and the reality of it. Psalm 60 here especially in connection with the Edomites. The Edomites are going to be one of Israel's biggest enemies in the day of the Lord. Whole psalm just about focusing on them. For time's sake here, verse 5, that thy beloved may be delivered, save with thy right hand, and hear me. And look at the nations that are in league with them there. You got Moab is my watch, but over Edom will I cast up my shoe. Philistia, triumph over thou because of me. Who will bring me into the strong city? Who will lead me to Edom? And so forth there. Give us help from trouble, for vain is the help of man. That's a deliverance that they're at. A physical deliverance once again there. Through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. He's going to come once again, just as described there back in Psalm 50, and physically do that for them, and lead them in a victory parade in connection with it, and also privilege some of them, as other passages clearly talk about, to fight with him. Well, that takes you up to that 60th Psalm there. And you got those core psalms. It's not that none of the other psalms talk about deliverance, as you know if you've read them through, or at least even taken a concordance and just looked up the word deliver, deliverance, and similar type concepts, synonymous terms. You see the second book of the Psalms is packed with them. Look before we leave the second book of the Psalms to the 68th Psalm. The 68th Psalm in particular returns to the mechanical means of the Lord's physical coming as the mighty God to deliver and everything. And it amplifies upon what was set forth back in his opening verse of Psalm 50. I just want you to note that. Psalm 68 verse 1. Let God arise. That's the issue there. The time at which it comes to pass, once again, Son of Man sitting at the Father's right hand, then he stands up, he arises. He rises to judge his people, and he rises to come once again. And he physically mounts that white horse there in Revelation 19, and he comes. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, let them also that hate him flee before him. See, beginning here in the 68th Psalm, you're coming close to the end of the second book of the Psalms, and there's some things that are being said that are preparing you for the third book of the Psalms, dealing with avengement. And now the issue is not just physically delivering the remnant, but it's the issue of God also avenging his cause with Israel upon those that hate him. And they demonstrate their hatred for him by hating his people, Israel, especially his believing remnant. And so David comes along here now and says, let them also, let his enemies be scattered, let them also that hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. He's going to come and be there. But let the righteous, there's the remnant, be glad. Let them rejoice before God. Let them exceedingly rejoice. Sing unto God. Sing praises to his name, Jehovah once again. Extol him that rides upon the heavens. See, that's the physical time. That's when he's physically coming once again upon that horse that John sees there in Revelation 19, fulfilling the oaths that he made back to Israel before he had brought them into the land, just before Moses died, recorded in Deuteronomy 33. Extol him that rides upon the heavens by his name, Yah, the basic I am. And I am, the mighty God, coming as your deliverer. And rejoice before him. A father of the fatherless and a judge of the widows is God in his holy habitation. Once again, they're the ones that are particularly persecuted, once again, by the apostate religious system. God setteth the solitary in families. He bringeth out those that are bound with chains, but the rebellious dwell in a dry land. And that now the exacting details of that coming and everything I described, and that Israel's already experienced it once in their history. God set it forth as a type. Verse 7. O God, when thou wentest forth before thy people, that's past tense, when you did this in the past, when thou didst march through the wilderness, see, there's the pause. The significance there is what I'm talking about right now, with God coming once again, riding upon the heavens in Israel's help, and providing the final deliverance there. Israel's already seen an example of that, and has had some experience of that back when God came down and they marched through the wilderness. And the sealer is saying, you better understand that. Now let's go on and look at it. The earth shook, the heavens also dropped at the presence of God, verse 8. Even Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. See, he was present there, and he gave him a foretaste once again of his capacity to deliver and to avenge his cause. And the same experience that took place back then will experience again. That's why the day of the Lord has the earth shaking, reeling to and fro like a drunkard and everything, being moved out of its place. Verse 9, Thou, O God, descend a plentiful rain, whereby thou hast confirmed thine inheritance when it was weary. They're going to be weary out here too. He'll do the same thing again. Thy congregation hath dwelt therein. Thou, O God, hast prepared of thy goodness for the poor. He's prepared it all for them. They got a doctrinal, they're going to experience it out there. The Lord gave the word. Great was the company of those that published it. Kings of armies did flee apace, and she that carried home divided the spoil. Though ye have lean among the pots, yet shall ye be as the wings of a dove covered with silver, and the feathers with yellow gold. When the Almighty scattered kings in it, it was white as snow in Solomon. The hill of God is at the hill of Bashan, and high hill is the hill of Bashan. Why leap ye high hills? This is the hill which God desired at the hill, Zion, of course. Yea, the Lord will dwell in it forever. He comes once again to do that, vanquish his enemies, deliver those, deliver his nation and his physical land also from the armies that have compassed it around about. They're going to flee apace and be destroyed when he comes. The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of angels. That's part of Israel's guardian angel concept there once again. The Lord is among them as in Sinai in the holy place. He's among them out there as was back here. There's a parallel there. There's things just to learn from back there that take place out here. He leads captivity. Thou hast ascended on high, up Mount Zion there. Thou hast led captivity captive. Thou hast received gifts for men, yea, for the rebellious also, that the Lord might dwell among them. And then they go on and talk about the blessings that'll come out of all that. But that's a further description, since the 50th Psalm introduced the issue, of the mechanics of his coming as their deliverer and providing the deliverance. It ends up down in verse 33. Sing unto God, ye kingdoms of the... verse 33, To him that rideth upon the heavens of heavens, which were of old. Lo, he doth send out his voice, and that a mighty voice, because he's coming as a mighty God. Ascribe ye strength or might unto God. His excellency is over Israel, and his strength is in the clouds. O God, thou art terrible out of thy holy places. The God of Israel is he that giveth strength and power unto his people. Blessed be God. That's how takes that issue of the deliverance and to bless him once again as such, and it describes that more, but it's part of naturally as the second book of the Psalms, dealing with that issue. Well, let's move on to the third book of the Psalms. Once again, we're just looking at the core Psalms, especially, and talking a little bit about some things regarding them. Third book of the Psalms begins here in Psalm 73 and runs through Psalm 89. You're dealing with the Avenger and his avengement. I've already made a few comments once again upon the fact that that's a closely related issue to the Deliverer. It takes place at the same time during the day of the Lord. But because it is a separate issue, and because it has especially to deal with the avenging of God's cause with his nation upon his enemies, and especially upon Satan and his plan of evil on this earth, it needs to be recognized as a separate issue, although a number of the judgments and executions of God's wrath that will be taking place in the day of his wrath accomplish both physical deliverance for the remnant and avengement. That's why you have a repetition of a number of those type things here in this third book of the Psalms. But let's, like I said, Psalm 73 through Psalm 89, turn to the 79th Psalm. And that's the core Psalm here in the third book of the Psalms. It's all 13 verses long, but I'd like to have, I want to focus upon, have you look at another one of the Psalms here for another particular reason, just a moment here. So I'm going to let that stand as the core Psalm. And, well, let's start off with it there for a moment. Verse 1. O God, the heathen are come into thine inheritance. This is a description once again of what's going to take place at the midpoint of the day of the Lord's wrath there, with the man of sin and his armies once again, and the destruction of Jerusalem, and the casting out of the temple, and all that business. And it's at that time, as Daniel is later on told, when Michael stands up the great prince for the people of Israel and everything. The guardian angel concept goes into effect, and the commencement of the avenging of God's cause with Israel on the earth begins to take place. That's why it's called the Great Tribulation and everything. And the Lord executes a number of judgments that are described in the book of the Revelation during those last 3.5 years, solely designed to avenge his cause with Israel. But it's that event that triggers the jealousy in the day of God's wrath and puts into effect the third mandate of the Davidic covenant, the Avenger and his avengement. So it starts out saying, "Oh God, the heathen are coming to thine inheritance." Note they call the heathen not just the Gentiles. The heathen, that has to do with their idolatry and their involvement in the satanic plan of evil on this earth. Thy holy temple they have defiled. They have laid Jerusalem on heaps. The dead bodies of thy servants have they given to be meat unto the fowls of the heaven, and the flesh of thy saints unto the beasts of the earth. Their blood have they shed like water round about Jerusalem, and there was none to bury them. We have become a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and derision to them that are round about us. How long, Lord, wilt thou be angry forever? Shall thy jealousy burn like... See, the issue now is not just anger against apostate Israel, it's anger and jealousy against the nations and their involvement as heathen nations in the plan of evil to destroy Israel. And the psalmist wants that anger and that jealousy to burn for his people, to avenge God's cause with Israel against those nations. Pour out thy wrath upon the heathen that have not known thee, verse 6, and upon the kings that have not called upon thy name, for they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his dwelling place. O remember not against us former iniquities. Let thy tender mercy speedily prevent us, for we are brought very low. O help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of thy name. Help us. The issue isn't simply deliver us. Avenge your cause with us, as we'll see in just a moment in the next few verses. And the glory of thy name is that you've promised to be the deliverer, the redeemer, the deliverer, and the avenger. And deliver us and purge away our sins for thy name's sake. Wherefore should the heathen say, where is their God? Let him be known among the heathen in our sight by the revenging of the blood of thy servants, which is shed. That's the issue now. Avenge us. That's the issue in this third book of Psalms. Now, the 79th Psalm is sitting right in the middle there as the core psalm. Let the sighing of the prisoner come before thee. According to the greatness of thy power, preserve those that are appointed to die. As refers to the extermination policy there of the man of sin in the last half. Well, that's the issue now. And within this third book of the Psalms here, let me just check the time, see how much we're going here. Okay. Within this third book of the Psalms, there resides a particular psalm that shows where the focus of the avenging is going to be. It's described here in the 79th Psalm as the heathen. But there's a particular collection or group of heathen nations that the satanic policy of evil against Israel will be utilizing during that time. It's the confederacy of nations of the man of sin. And they're cited for you, and a psalm is written about them. And the psalm is written in connection with the appeal that the remnant will make to God to avenge his cause with Israel by the destruction, particularly of those 10 heathen nations. Come to the 83rd Psalm. The 83rd Psalm. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. You harken right back to that 79th Psalm, the beginning of the core, in which you got the issue of the ones that hate you, and the ones that and your enemies. And now the issue in the 83rd Psalm is they've made a tumult, and they've lifted up the head, and they have now begun to operate. Verse 3, they have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and crafty counsel against thy hidden ones. There's two categories of individuals there that God's concerned with. His people, that's his nation as a whole. His hidden ones, that's his remnant, that have gone to their hiding place. So you're dealing from the midpoint on here. When they see the abominable desolation, they flee to their hiding place. They have said, verse 4, here's what these enemies, plural, have said. Come, verse 4, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. So this is a direct assault against the plan and purpose of God with Israel. This is all inspired by the adversary. His man of sin, whom he indwells at that time, puts this all together. Verse 5, for they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. There's a confederacy of nations, and there's 10 of them here. They're listed. And folks, there's not a European nation among them. The man of sin doesn't come out of Europe. The Confederacy of Nations is not a European confederacy. The European Economic Commission, let the Bible tell you what to think. Not popular prophecy preachers that don't go by what the Bible says, but take events and try and make the Bible fit the events. Here are the nations of the Confederacy. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagarenes, there's 4. Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, there's 7. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, there's 9. Asher, there's 10. Also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot. The children of Lot are the Moabites and the Ammonites. There's your 10 nations of the Confederacy. The leader is the Assyrian out of Asher, as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Micah, Hosea, and the 5th course of punishment prophets describe. Now there's that confederacy of the 10 nations of the man of sin that will operate out there during that time. Those are the particular heathen nations that God will avenge his cause with Israel by destroying. Those are the ones that take Israel's land. Those are the ones that come in and destroy the city and lay it waste and defile the temple and depart the land for gain and put the extermination policy into effect against Israel as cited there in verse 4. And that have the appointed ones to die back then in the 79th Psalm, and have the blood of his people all around, and no one's going to bury them. That just desecrate and cast their revulsion and their abomination and their hatred against Israel and demonstrate in those manners. That takes place from the midpoint on throughout the last 3.5 years of the day of the Lord there. And it's during that time that God's avenging and avengement especially is the issue. And verse 9 goes on, it says, do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung of the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb, and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. That's all taking place in the past. Those things took place back in time under the first course of punishment, back in the days of the judges, back when God demonstrated to Israel under the first course of punishment the need for all 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant. The one cited there when the Midianites with Gideon, when he was threshing wheat in the floor of the winepress there to hide it from the Midianites. When Sisera was there, when Jabin and all that, when those others, when that all took place back at that time, God was demonstrating to Israel the need not only for the Redeemer and the Deliverer, but the need for an Avenger. He raised up Gideon as a deliverer. He raised up Samson as an avenger. By the way, that's why Samson personally, the issue he was asking for was to when his eyes had been put out once again and his hair had grown back, and then he asked God to give him the strength that he might avenge his eyes upon the Philistines. That's the issue. He's functioning as the Avenger. And to avenge what they had done to him. He functions as a type of Israel, suffering the abuse of their heathenism. They're right there in the idol temple. Well, that's what God gave him not only the doctrinal understanding of the need for the Avenger way back here, he also gave them the foretastes of how the avengement transpires. And so when it comes to avenge your cause with us against these, Asaph comes along and says here, do unto them as you did back then. Asaph doesn't just simply come along and say, things were that was a pretty good thing back then. I think I'd like to have you do that again. Asaph doctrinally knows what was going on back then. Verse 13. Let's see, look at verse 12 once again. What was said back then was what those heathen were saying, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. That's what that Confederacy of Nations says there. Once the extermination policy goes into effect, the man of sin divides the land for gain. That's what he does. He divides it for gain among his confederacy and says, you can take the houses of God for your possession. Verse 13, O my God, make them like a wheel, and as the stubble before the wind. As the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. The means of avengement. We haven't time to go over this. This is a fascinating study all in itself. It's tremendous. To examine the means of the avengement. We've seen a little bit about the Lord coming once again, and the mechanical means of his coming, and the way in which the deliverance is produced. There's a route the Lord takes and everything in connection with that. There's things that he does, though, in conjunction with that to produce the avengement, and it involves the issue, as it says there, of the tempest and a storm. And that's just not a figure of speech, folks. That's a literal issue. Hold your place here, for example, in Psalm 83. Come over to Nahum. Nahum, the book of Nahum, chapter 1. Nahum, the burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. It's the burden of Nineveh, what Nineveh is going to suffer in the day of the Lord, the burden it's going to suffer in the day of the Lord. The reason why Nineveh is cited out once again, because the man of sin's an Assyrian, he comes out of Nineveh. He's Asher there in the 83rd Psalm there. And that's all set forth in the book of Nahum here, and in other places, but especially in the book of Nahum. And what Nineveh is going to suffer when God avenges. Nineveh is going to be, God's going to avenge his cause with Israel against those 10 heathen nations. They've confederated together with one consent to exterminate Israel. The plot began a long, long time ago. Others come on board. They form a confederacy of nations and everything like that. The ones of old time, like Edom, Moab, Ammon, the Philistines, and Asher, the Assyrians, they're singled out. And they particularly suffer some effects, more so than others do, although total destruction is what everybody suffers. All that confederacy of nations. But when Asaph back in the 83rd Psalm says, as the fire, verse 14, as the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. All the confederacy will see that, but that's particularly going to come upon Asher, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Look at it here as far as Asher, Nineveh, is concerned. Verse 1, the burden of Nineveh, Nahum, verse 1, chapter 1. The burden of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. God is jealous. See, that's the issue. It's his jealousy for his people. And the Lord what? Revengeth. The Lord revengeth and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way. This is the issue of when he doesn't, puts into effect. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind and in the storm. A whirlwind is a tempest, just like Psalm 83 says. And in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebuketh the sea, and maketh it dry. He drieth up all the rivers. Bashan languisheth, and Carmel, and the flower of Lebanon languisheth. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence. Yea, the world, and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before his indignation? Who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and the rocks are thrown down by him. Then it goes on to describe the Lord as good, and describes the provision for the remnant during that time when he avenges his cause with Israel against the nations. But that Asaph refers to, the persecute them with thy tempest, make them afraid with thy storm, is part of the revenging of God's cause with Israel that's reserved against at least 4 of those particular ones in that confederacy of nation, Nineveh, the Assyrians in particular. By the way, that's why when you go to the book of the Revelation there, and the judgments come upon that man of sin's kingdom, you got the heavens opened, and a great hail comes out, storm, tempest, a talent wait, and persecutes them. It's not just a figure of speech, folks, it's the real thing. Well, we're just about out of time here for this hour, but we're accomplishing the goal here, and at least getting an appreciation for the reality of the 3rd book of the Psalms, Psalm 73 through 89, dealing with the Avenger and his avengement. Let's just take the remainder of time here and finish off the 83rd Psalm there. Verse 16, fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the Most High over all the earth. See, the aspect of God's Jehovahness, that when the kingdom is established, the aspect of God's Jehovahness that the Gentiles are first and foremost going to be impressed with, is the aspect of him delivering his people from them and avenging his cause with Israel against them. And on the basis of that, they'll be told to submit, and on the basis of their submission, they'll be offered the redemption to be blessed in the kingdom with his nation. Now, we don't have time to go over that right now, but that's what goes on. That's if you understand and appreciate that, the way in which this psalm, for example, and others like it ends, is significant. Well, we have the two remaining books of the book of Psalms to deal with in our next lesson. And then following that, we'll take one more lesson. That's what it looks like right now, for a total of 6 lessons to this course. That may change, but we'll see. But at least one more lesson following the next one. And in that final lesson, we'll look once again at some representative psalms, particularly psalms that give us a doctrinal appreciation for their role with the remnant out there. Ones like I've cited, like Psalm 23 in particular. In fact, I'd like to have a look at the 79th Psalm one more time for some very particular issues there. The 37th Psalm is one we could look at. The 34th Psalm. We could look at every single one of them, of course. But we'll look at some very particular ones, oftentimes some ones that are misunderstood and not appreciated like they ought to be. But in preparation for next lesson, if you could look through the 4th and the 5th book of the Psalms. The 4th book of the Psalms, once again, Psalm 90 through Psalm 106, dealing with the king and his kingdom. I'll give you right now the core Psalms to focus upon, Psalm 95 through 100. They're all the new songs about the glory of the kingdom. And then the 5th book of the Psalms, Psalm 107 through Psalm 150, the end of the book, the blesser and his blessings. The core Psalms there are the songs of degree, from Psalm 120 through to Psalm 134. And if you could at least look through those core Psalms to each one of the remaining 2 books of the Psalms there and gain an appreciation for what they say and the terminology used there, we can just focus upon them briefly and appreciate the reality of the fact that those 2 remaining books of the Psalms deal respectively with the king and his kingdom and the blesser and his blessings. Okay, until next time.